Franklin D. Roosevelt's story of courage. In a quiet room of history, imagine a man who could not stand on his own 2 feet, yet stood taller in spirit than almost anyone of his generation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt sat in a wheelchair most people never saw, hidden carefully behind lecterns or the arms of strong companions. Yet from that chair, he carried the weight of a nation. He carried voices of despair from families without work, carried the silence of breadlines, and carried the fear of a world sliding toward war. What looked like limitation to the world became the ground where his courage grew. This is not just a history lesson. It is a mirror for anyone who has faced a moment when life closed a door. Perhaps you know that feeling, when health or money or circumstances placed you in a chair you never chose. Roosevelt's story begins here, not with triumph, but with a quiet decision. He would not allow weakness to define him. Welcome to Learn English Listening. My name is Lydia, and I will guide you through this journey, where English phrases meet human courage, where learning a language becomes learning resilience. As we walk together, you will hear simple English expressions that carry deep meaning, and you will also see how one man turned personal struggle into national leadership. Before we begin, let me ask you something. Which city are you joining us from, and what hour is it there? I'd love to picture where you are listening, maybe in the soft light of morning or in the late quiet of night. So let us begin with the image of Roosevelt, hands resting firmly on the wheels of his chair, eyes not lowered in defeat, but lifted toward the horizon. His journey asks us, can courage grow precisely in the soil of our deepest struggles? Franklin Roosevelt was born into comfort, a life surrounded by the Hudson River estates and the traditions of privilege. Yet at the age of 39, everything shifted. A sudden fever during a summer vacation led to weakness in his legs. Within days, the man who once loved to sail and hike was unable to stand. Doctors called it polio. In a world without today's medical options, it meant paralysis. For Roosevelt, it also meant the terrifying possibility that his public career was over before it had truly begun. Imagine the weight of that moment. A man trained to lead, groomed for politics, suddenly facing the judgment of a society that equated physical strength with authority. He withdrew from public life for a time, not only to heal, but to wrestle with his identity. Behind closed doors, he fell into silence. His wife Eleanor became his constant support, while his children watched him adapt to new routines. The man who once walked confidently into ballrooms now had to be carried upstairs. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever carried a burden no one else could see? For those between 25 and 40, the invisible burdens might be anxiety, financial pressure, or the exhaustion of balancing work and family. Roosevelt's hidden battle mirrored the struggles of many today. The fear that weakness will erase opportunity, the dread that failure will define the future. Yet even in his darkest reflections, something unexpected happened. Instead of surrendering, Roosevelt began to imagine a new way of living. He learned to swim daily, strengthening his upper body. He taught himself to stand with braces for short moments to project the image of stamina. More importantly, he cultivated resilience of spirit, discovering that leadership is not about walking tall, but about carrying hope for others. This part of his journey reminds us that reflection often follows struggle. We cannot choose every storm, but we can choose the meaning we give it. Roosevelt's chair did not confine him. It reshaped the way he would touch the world. In the quiet shadows of his private battle, Roosevelt discovered a hidden key. What he once thought of as a loss became the very source of his strength. Unable to rely on his legs, he relied on his words. He turned to the radio, a technology still new, and created what came to be known as fireside chats. In these simple, steady conversations, Americans felt as though he was sitting in their living room. A man they could not see standing gave them the courage to stand themselves. What was the secret? Roosevelt knew that people do not follow perfection, they follow authenticity. His wheelchair, though unseen, reminded him daily of struggle. That struggle softened his voice, sharpened his empathy, and taught him to speak to the heart. This is where English itself can guide us. Roosevelt's life teaches us phrases that carry more than grammar. They carry resilience. The first phrase, lead with courage. To lead is not to have every answer, but to move forward despite uncertainty. Roosevelt led with courage when he unveiled the New Deal, bold programs to put people back to work and revive a collapsing economy. The second phrase, one step at a time. Though he could not physically walk, he understood that recovery, whether personal or national, comes gradually. He built confidence by small efforts. One fireside chat, one reform, one promise kept. The third phrase, I'm still learning. This is humility. Roosevelt admitted mistakes, adapted policies, and showed a nation that even leaders grow through trial. Do these words echo in your own life? Perhaps you too are asked to lead with courage, to take one step at a time, or to admit, I'm still learning. Roosevelt's hidden key was not strength of body, but resilience of mind. That resilience became the bridge between a broken man and a healing nation. The stage was set in the early 1930s. America was sinking under the weight of the Great Depression. Banks had failed, factories were silent, and millions stood in lines for food. Confidence was not only low, it was broken. Into this storm rolled a man in a wheelchair, barely able to walk without braces, yet daring to step forward as President of the United States. Franklin Roosevelt's inauguration speech rang across the country with the unforgettable line, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." This was not just rhetoric. It was a lifeline. Families listening by radio, huddled in cold apartments, felt warmth return to their hearts. Roosevelt's calm voice, deliberate and steady, cut through despair. He unveiled the New Deal, a series of programs that offered jobs, support, and a sense that the nation still had a future. The climax of his leadership came not from hiding his weakness, but from channeling it into resilience. Imagine the courage it took to appear in public, to lift his body with heavy braces, and to wave as if nothing could limit him. Behind every smile was effort. Behind every handshake was pain. Yet what the people saw was a leader who believed enough for everyone. And then came war. The attack on Pearl Harbor thrust America into global conflict. Once again, Roosevelt spoke not from fear, but from resolve. He reminded the nation that resilience is not a luxury, it is survival. His words carried more weight because people knew he lived them daily. Let me ask you, if tomorrow gave you a fresh start, what would you do differently? Roosevelt asked his country this in action, challenging them to rise again, to build anew, to trust in the power of resilience. At this turning point, Roosevelt was no longer just a man in a chair. He became the pulse of a nation rediscovering its strength. Think of a great oak tree standing in the middle of a storm. Lightning may scar its bark, branches may snap, but its roots dig deeper into the earth with every gust of wind. Franklin Roosevelt's life was much the same. Polio bent his body, but it could not break his will. In fact, the storm of illness forced his roots of courage to grow deeper than ever before. Healing did not come by erasing the wheelchair. It came by reframing its meaning. What once looked like defeat became the very symbol of resilience. Roosevelt refused to let his chair define him. Instead, he allowed it to remind him of the millions of Americans who also carried unseen burdens. In this way, his wound became his wisdom. Picture a garden after heavy rain. The soil is muddy, the plants droop, but within days the sun dries the earth, and the stems straighten again. Roosevelt's leadership was like that moment of recovery. His voice lifted a weary people, reminding them that storms never last forever. Here lies the lesson for us. You may carry scars, but they can become the very lines where light enters your life. Your limitations may point you toward your true strength. Roosevelt's reframe was simple yet powerful. He could not walk, but he could lead. He could not climb mountains, but he could move a nation. Healing, then, is not the absence of pain. It is the transformation of pain into purpose. That is the legacy Roosevelt left, and it is a path each of us can walk in our own way. And perhaps the most healing truth of all is this. Even in a chair, Roosevelt chose motion. He kept moving forward in mind, in heart, in vision. That choice to move, no matter how small, became contagious. It whispered to millions of Americans that progress does not require perfection, only persistence. And in that whisper, people found the strength to rise again. At the end of Roosevelt's journey, we see not just a president, but a man who turned private struggle into public strength. His wheelchair was not a prison. It was a chariot that carried him through the Great Depression and a world at war. From it, he spoke words that gave people courage to wake up, go to work, and believe in tomorrow again. Now imagine yourself at a crossroads. On one side lies comfort, the familiar routines, the safe choices, the quiet acceptance of limits. On the other side lies growth, uncertainty, effort, the risk of failure, but also the possibility of transformation. Roosevelt could have chosen comfort, retreating into the shadows of illness. Instead, he chose growth, and in doing so, he lifted an entire nation. At this moment, you stand between comfort and growth. Which path will you take? If this video gave you something meaningful, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to keep walking with us on this journey of English and self-growth. As you reflect on Roosevelt's life, remember this: strength is not measured by the steps we take, but by the hope we inspire. You may not lead a nation, but you can lead with courage in your own circle, your family, your work, your dreams. That is how resilience lives on, one voice, one decision, one life at a time. And as you face your own turning points, remember that growth is never easy, but it is always worth it. Roosevelt's path shows us that the human spirit is stronger than any barrier. When you choose courage over comfort, you create ripples that touch more lives than you can ever imagine. That is true leadership, and it begins with you.